Hi, my name is Rob Matthew, and in this very lengthy video, which I will admit probably nobody will watch, want to take the testimony of Lindsey Tichenor and Michael Frazier and the questions posed to them on a bill to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in K through 12 public schools in Kentucky. I want to take those, give them some context, give them some facts, provide my own commentary on it, and I also don't want to take that video and pull snippets out of context. I want you to hear the full debate, full discussion, and I want to weigh in on it, which is what this video attempts to do. Some background for me: I am a public school parent. My daughter graduated from Jefferson County Public Schools, which are heavily attacked by Senator Tichenor in both this discussion and elsewhere, as well as her fellow Republican representatives do the same. I am a public school graduate myself, graduated from Oldham County Schools, which is another point of frustration here because Lindsey also graduated from Oldham County Schools. And whereas I learned how to make an argument supported by facts and evidence, and the way that, correlation does not equal causation, several concepts here that I'm going to discuss as we go through this. Those are things I learned in Oldham County Schools. Those are things that either Lindsey did not learn or doesn't care about in trying to make a persuasive argument to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion, which ultimately boils down to her saying, here's some scary stuff. Here's some stuff I don't have any real support for other than anecdotes you'll have to trust me on, but this is bad and it needs to go away because it's not helping kids. So this video attempts to address that. All I can say is I had an excellent public school experience. My daughter, who went to Jefferson County, had an even better experience. She graduated at the top of her class. She had excellent exposure to much more than I did as a student in terms of training and cultural experiences. Plus, she was surrounded by students who didn't look like her, worship like her, think like her, speak like her, and who had backgrounds that were totally different than hers, which I think is a good supplemental education as we move through life. And she is currently working on her master's degree. She has paid for her entire schooling herself through scholarships and additional grants and awards that she has won. So I can say that JCPS works, but I also know that JCPS serves a very, very different population than the rest of the state. There's some facts and figures that are brought up here that are wrong or don't consider the full context of JCPS. But it is a heavily minority population district whose needs need to be met. And we can discuss all day whether diversity, equity, inclusion efforts are meeting those, but to simply toss them out without discussing what is and isn't working, or how we can figure out what is and isn't working, and supporting that is simply asinine to me. So I'm probably going to hit some points time and time again, but I do want to provide some context to this discussion and argument that Lindsey does not provide, that her fellow senators don't provide, and just want to point out, which I'll point out later again, the fact that Lindsey talks all about how this harms students, but brings nobody to the table who can speak directly to that, speaks volumes. She'll mention teachers, she'll mention parents, she'll mention students and say how they're harmed by it and stories she's heard, but none of those people are at the table with her. The only person that she's brought to the table with her, she had 3 guests, 2 of them dropped out. One of them is Michael Frazier, who is a man who shows up at Frankfort quite a bit. I think he loves being on camera, loves the attention he gets from the government. He is part of Americans for Prosperity, which is a phony grassroots organization that pushes conservative talking points, conservative ideologies into law via a very, very well-funded and well-connected network across all 50 states to push these laws and ideas into our legislatures. You'll hear Lindsey talk about the need for critical thinking and free thinkers and to eliminate groupthink. Know that these efforts to push against diversity, equity, inclusion are the epitome of that groupthink and lack of critical thinking. I'll point that out later in the video, but it's something I think you should keep in mind, that none of this is to make things better for education. This is all a political movement without evidence, without thought, without any consideration of the impacted students. It's simply a push to eliminate a program that makes certain people feel uncomfortable and they know can be a winning political point with certain voters. It is not something that makes our schools better, our education better, to eliminate these programs, and nobody here provides any evidence that doing so would help education. So here's the testimony starting from the beginning.
Thank you, Chairman West. Lindsey Tichenor, State Senator from District 6.
Could you pull that mic a little closer, please, if possible?
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Would you like my guest to introduce himself on Zoom?
Yes, let's do that.
Michael Frazier, Executive Director for the Kentucky Student Rights Coalition.
Thank you. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Yes, two of my guests, one was stuck in an airport and a flight was canceled, and the other had a scheduling conflict arise.
Okay, I want to point out a few things about committee meetings as she talks about having a guest there to speak on behalf of this bill. Committee meetings are held in Frankfort. They are meetings where bills are introduced and discussed in a committee. Of course, they have to pass out a committee to be considered for a vote on the floor, which is another whole convoluted process. But this is really the only place that the public gets a publicly accountable discussion with their lawmakers. And that is all dependent on the committee allowing you to testify. In this case, Lindsey's invited some people to show up and discuss it. And every accommodation is made for those people. In this case, a Zoom meeting for Michael Frazier. If there's a bill that you as a member of the public are upset about, want to discuss, want to be heard, you can send an email. And I will say that, you know, if you've had any experience doing that, probably it's not getting read, or it's read by an advisor. Because there's no accountability for those emails like there is with our school systems and other state agencies, I can't go in and say, okay, give me all the emails Lindsey Tichenor's received for and against Bill X. I have to rely on her to tell me that my community overwhelmingly supports it. Well, these meetings are important for that reason, in that they have a public face where people can speak out against it. And I mention this because in the case of the transgender bill, which was also a hotly debated topic, the bill that I'm talking about was presented by Jennifer Decker, who's coming up later in this conversation, who asks a question here. There was a full contingent of people who knew about the bill, showed up in force to Frankfort, and they were wedged into a tiny conference room. They all had to stay outside because there was no room there. I would say probably, and I'm guessing here, but 5 or 6 full pages of people who signed up who wanted to testify, either for or against the bill. They were all there, and the bill came up for discussion. There was 20 or 30 minutes of the representative and her witnesses, who were not experts. They were just basically people from fringe groups and groups devoted to anti-transgender legislation, who spoke against the bill. And then they left maybe 10 or 15 minutes, if that, for public comment, of which 3 people got to speak. There were no impacted students who got to speak. The vast majority of the people that were outside of that room who signed up to speak did not get a chance to voice. Now, we can all argue that, well, they could send an email. But this is a place where a public face gets put on an issue and where people can confront and directly address their legislators, and they are a captive audience. They have to hear it. They can tune it out, but they have to be there, and there is a public record that it's happened. If you send an email to your legislator, there is no accountability for those emails. I know from previous work that I've done that I file an open records request. I can get anything on our school systems. I can get anything on like local and state, local government, and a lot of state government. But when it comes to our legislators, we cannot pry into their emails to say, okay, what are you hearing from your constituents? We have to trust them to say that. So there's a lot of talk in Frankfort about, you know, when you talk to a legislator, well, my constituents are overwhelmingly for this. They know that they are safe in saying that because they know there's no way you can hold them accountable for it. I cannot go and get that information. I cannot say, okay, Lindsey Tichenor, you've got 58 emails that say this is the worst bill I've ever seen, and you got 2 in support of you, and they came from out of state. Whatever it may be, we don't have that. This is the only place we can do it. It's in Frankfort, which is a long distance from most of Kentucky. It's during the day when people have to work. It is, depending on like weather, like this December, we've had a lot of snow. May not be able to get there in time. And the public's not afforded a Zoom meeting where you can call in and speak out. And plus there are time limitations. And Lindsey's discussion is about our school systems. I will note that our school systems, including JCPS, have been very accommodating to public speakers who have a lot more vitriol often than you'll hear addressed to our legislators. And they sit there and take it. And our legislators are quite fragile snowflakes because they do not want that kind of confrontation. They don't want their dirty laundry accessible to public records. They don't want any of that. So these committee meetings are important, but it's important to note that the people who show up are called by the person presenting the bill typically, and that the public has to know about it, has to show up, and has to be afforded the opportunity to speak. And they will always come second to whoever the legislator is called. So I just wanted to point that out here.
The bill request 1149 is a measure to eliminate the wasteful, ineffective, and divisive DEI initiatives that have become interwoven in K-12's institutions. BR 1149 is very similar to Senate Bill 165 from last session with a few revisions. A brief summary is included in your committee documents. In 2025, the General Assembly made a bold step and passed HB 4 to reclaim our post-secondary institutions from the grip of these same discriminatory policies and practices. I am hopeful that we will be able to take the same measures this session regarding our K-12 schools. In recent years, we have seen a strong push to incorporate DEI throughout K-12 education, with the stated goal of closing long-held achievement gaps among minority students and students who are economically disadvantaged. The federal government under the Biden administration funneled more than $1 billion towards programming and initiatives to implement DEI into schools across the nation, further bloating our already heavy administrative positions and utilizing the educational platform to indoctrinate students, leaving behind negative societal impacts that may last for years to come.
Lindsey likes to talk a lot about indoctrination. Just want to point out that she has been a primary supporter of bringing in TPUSA, which is a propaganda engine of the Republican Party, as well as LifeWise Academy in Oldham County, which is meant to indoctrinate children into a certain Christian worldview, a certain form of Christianity. So she's not against all indoctrination.
The Trump administration has taken several steps to move our educational institutions away from the practices of DEI, issuing a recent Dear Colleague letter instructing our schools to stop operating their discriminatory and ineffective programs. Of the 171 Kentucky school districts, all but 2, JCPS and Fayette County Public Schools, signed a pledge to move away from the illegal DEI practices.
So it just so happens that the 2 school districts that Lindsey's referring to have the highest population of minority students. So it would stand to reason that maybe they have some input and some thought into the needs of those students. And just who exactly is saying this is illegal? Are we counting on the Trump administration, the administration of a convicted felon, to tell us what is and isn't illegal? Because he's been losing a lot of legal battles recently.
In July, the U.S. Education Office for Civil Rights notified one of those 2 districts, Jefferson County, that they were in violation of Title VI for unlawfully considering race, engaging in racial balancing, and by utilizing a funding formula that explicitly discriminates based on the racial makeup of its schools. This is their racial equity funding model. Funding loss to the district was $9.7 million. With the current deficit, this funding loss is significant. Federal funding accounts for 28% of the state education funding. Continuing on in DEI initiatives is a financial risk that could jeopardize available resources for Kentucky students.
Okay, let's be clear who's to blame for pulling funding away from JCPS and other school systems. It is Donald Trump and the Donald Trump administration. It is a goal of Donald Trump, Project 2025, to eliminate all programs like this, regardless of their usefulness, their service, their helpfulness to minority students. They hate these programs. They hate them with a red-hot passion. They don't want funds spent on anyone but billionaires and people like Trump. They do not want this money spent. They don't want their tax money. They don't want to pay taxes, and they don't want tax money spent on anything.
The potential future loss of federal funding is but one measure of the fiscal cost of DEI. Credit card statements and purchase orders acquired through recent open records requests have revealed a gross misuse of funds for lavish travel to DEI conferences, hotels, airfare, and travel expenses. Most notably, recently was the approved travel to Australia, with the known expenses reaching near $30,000 for 3 Fayette County school employees. Recurring catering charges for administrative roles and identity-based groups, entertainment, including bartending services, yes, bartending, DJs, live music, Louisville Pride, annual fraternity dues of $55,000, hundreds of thousands for DEI consulting firms, one of which was owned by a high-level employee of the DEI department. The vast majority of spending is also prioritized for minority-owned businesses as a point of policy. When measuring these expenses against student assessment and test scores, it becomes clear a great deal of these funds never reach Kentucky students. Misuse of these taxpayer funds that are allocated for educating Kentucky students is a strong indicator of why achievement gaps continue to linger.
You'll notice a lot here that Lindsey does not give specific examples about why diversity, equity, and inclusion is bad. She talks about things that have happened under DEI programs or specific documents without context or books or things that are stated, but she doesn't get to the core of why diversity, equity, and inclusion are bad. Instead, like here, she says, hey, look, this school district spent a fortune to send somebody to Australia for a conference. Okay, well, I would question, regardless of the subject, why any school district would do that. It has nothing to do with the benefits or drawbacks of DEI. A school district could spend that much money to go to a conference on leadership, on science and technology, on new innovations in education. I am a firm, I'm a Democrat, but I believe we shouldn't be wasting educational funds. And this, as presented by Lindsey, and I'll admit I have not researched it further, sounds like a gross misuse of funds to do that, to send somebody somewhere. But that does not have anything to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. It has to do with potential corruption or poor use of funds within a district. Doesn't have anything to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this is a red herring, one of many thrown out by Lindsey. It's not a great argument, but I'm sure somebody somewhere is going, wow, see that? That's why DEI is bad. They spent $30,000 to go to a conference. No, that's a problem with that district, certainly, but that does not implicate DEI.
Indeed, educational results of DEI have shown little to no measurable improvement for the very students it was meant to serve. A possible factor, many schools use curricula that are interwoven with DEI concepts and openly promote social justice as their platform to educate students. It was recently revealed that Fayette County Public Schools is planning to implement a new civics curriculum titled Facing History and Ourselves that is heavily laden with concepts that promote DEI through social justice and racial justice. This curriculum would cost the district $180,000 for just 2 elementary schools at a time when their district is struggling financially.
Okay, it's sometimes hard to tell with politicians. Are they deliberately misleading? Are they just too ignorant to do research and find out if the information they have is true? Do they just spout things out of their behinds? It's really hard to tell. And in Lindsey's case, I think we have to assume that it's a little of everything. And this is a case in point. She keeps talking about how diversity, equity, inclusion, SEL programs are not effective, and she goes to Fayette County's, $180,000 spent on this program that's a waste of money. So about that, this $180,000, it's a grant. It is a grant specifically earmarked for 2 schools. They weren't, one's middle, one's elementary, not 2 elementary schools like she said. They are magnet schools. And those magnet schools are devoted to civic involvement and student leadership. And this program helps support those goals, that vision for that magnet program. And usually magnet programs are something that parents choose and students choose for themselves. Parents choose for their kids. So, this is a school choice that someone has made. And Republicans love their school choice. So you'd think they'd be supporting these magnet programs and stuff to support those programs. But the interesting thing is that this is a grant. This is not money that's coming out of their budget. A grant works. We give you a grant for a specific purpose. You use it for a specific purpose or you lose it. So they're not wasting money out of the budget on $180,000 on this program. And this program is indeed not a waste. Lindsey Tichenor doesn't back up her thoughts that DEI and SEL don't help at all. She just says it. She assumes that based on test scores, which aren't the only measure of anything and don't necessarily tell you that a program is or isn't effective. What does tell you is a federal database called the What Works Clearinghouse, which is well known to educators, about different programs, reading, science, math. It evaluates them and in a context of peer-reviewed studies and other studies to say what's working, what isn't. And this program is rated as promising. When they faced some criticism, my understanding is that they went back and adjusted the program to make it better. And there have been 2 other studies since the What Works Clearinghouse study that says it was promising that have also said it's an effective program for students, teachers, and those involved in the schools. So it is effective. It's effective in its stated purposes. And Lindsey doesn't bring that out. Lindsey doesn't appear to care to bring that out. Lindsey probably didn't, it's not that hard to fire up Google, and if you know anything about education, to find some data resources and also to go in and read papers and find that information. But Lindsey didn't do that here. She just wants you to assume that because she said it's $180,000, which is indeed a lot of money, and because it's Fayette County Schools, which has been embroiled in this, wasteful spending controversy, some of which I agree seems like wasteful spending. But in this case, this was a grant, money given by the federal government for them for a specific purpose for a program that is effective as judged by at least 3 studies. So, again, Lindsey's misleading here, and one can only wonder why she's doing that, especially if she truly wants to have better educational outcomes.
Test scores have remained stagnant or have dramatically fallen, while schools identified with a CSI status are increasing in districts where DEI is most heavily implemented, as we recently heard from the previous presentation. In 2017, of the 51 identified CSI schools across the state, 21 of those were identified in Jefferson County. And now that number of 53 identified CSI schools, there are 41 in Jefferson County, primarily located in the most economically disadvantaged areas.
So I'm confused here. Is Lindsey saying that there's a problem that is specific to a certain population that perhaps we need to address through some targeted methods? That sounds a lot like diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
Prior to JCPS formally launching their DEI division in 2013, assessment saw high school students performing at 56% above proficiency in math and 72% in reading. Today, 26% of high school students are proficient or above in math and 35% in reading. And scores of those who are economically disadvantaged are even lower.
Okay. As a student in Oldham County, where Lindsey and I both grew up, I was always told you need to show your work, you need to source your data, and you need to draw the connections between what you're saying and the evidence. And that's woefully inadequate here. And I just want to point out a few things. First, primarily, I learned this in 7th grade biology class. Mr. Keith Willamy, excellent teacher who sadly left Oldham County Schools to go to Kentucky Country Day, but just an incredible teacher. I mean, 7th grade, and it stuck with me till today about experiments and data and correlation versus causation. There's just a lot there wrapped up in an incredible class by an incredible teacher. But she states 56% in math, 72% in reading. Those are the benchmarks that supposedly JCPS reached prior to DEI. And she says DEI came in 2013. Now, I can't dispute her data because I don't know where she got it from. She hasn't said where that data came from. She hasn't said the year, the source, the specifics, which, you can crunch those numbers a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different breakdowns of that data on the website. So I'm not disputing those numbers. Maybe they're accurate, maybe they're not. But I don't know because I can't check them. I've got nothing to verify them with. But what I was able to do was to take that 2013 date and work backwards on the Courier Journal just to see test scores, trying to see is there anything I could find, hoping to find those numbers, which I didn't. Kind of the limitations of the search you can do online for a Courier Journal, but did find this, and it's interesting. This is from 2013, so this is the year that DEI supposedly ruined everything. Heading, this is page A8, October 13th, 2013, Courier Journal. Reading, JCPS pushes to boost scores at elementaries. Overall, 42% of the district's 90 elementary schools saw their proficiency rates fall, including Low Elementary, a historically high-performing school whose rate dropped from 72% last year to 61.5%. So what's that? It's a 10.5-point drop. District officials say the drop is a result of tougher Common Core state standards, which call on students to engage in more analytical and critical thinking skills. It's clearly not the direction we want to see, but we were not surprised by the drop in reading schools, said Dewey Hensley, Chief Academic Officer for JCPS. Our students are being asked to demonstrate things differently, and it's going to take some time to get them accustomed to this new kind of teaching and learning. Okay, now I'm not going to argue that that's 2013, it's 2025 now. What's that, 12 years? You would hope scores would improve. But it brings back this question of if DEI was the cause, where is our evidence of causation? Because correlation does not equal causation. 2013 also saw the Boston Marathon bombing. Maybe the tragedy of that bombing caused our students to have some sort of trauma where they just could not perform. And I'm being facetious there, obviously, but there's not a causation established by Lindsey that DEI is the cause of this issue. And it would be nice if she could connect those dots, but she's just simply not able to and does not do that anywhere. It's simply 2013, or prior to 2013, we were here. 2025, we were here. All this in here is DEI that caused where we are now, and that's not good thinking. That's not the thinking I learned, critical thinking I learned in the same school system that Lindsey went to. So I don't know if she was asleep that day, didn't attend the same classes, didn't have decent teachers. I'm thinking she probably did, but maybe she just wasn't grasping it or understanding it. Maybe her test scores would not be up to par on these same tests. One other thing is that we all know that teachers are kind of pushed to teach to the test. So if you start changing up things and constantly shifting the benchmarks and the goalposts, tests are going to suffer. Or you're going to have people fudging things to try and get them up. So, there's a lot here. Correlation does not equal causation. It's a very simple principle found across health, science, everywhere, that the two, if you want to find out why there's a problem, you have to dig deeper. And I admit completely that in academics and education, it is very tough, primarily because, like in the healthcare system, it's very hard to experiment. It's actually even worse because you can't control for anything. You can't control for students, really. You can't control for teachers. You can't control for school system. You can't control for outside factors. You can work to try and limit the influence of those on your results, but and make some broad assumptions that I think are pretty common and been borne out. That wealthier kids are probably going to have a better time and have better scores than poor kids. Hungrier kids are going to fare worse than kids who have healthy meals. Kids who live in poverty don't do as well. Kids who are homeless don't do as well. I mean, they're kind of common sense that that we can look to and say, yeah, the more we support a child in the beginning, the better an outcome they're going to have. It doesn't mean that the wealthiest child in the United States could have terrible test scores, not apply themselves, not care. All that's possible, but we do not have a causation here that 2013 DEI came in, destroyed everything. It's just an assumption made on Lindsey's part because she hates DEI.
There are many factors that could be contributing to the negative effects of DEI. Newer disciplinary theories, like restorative justice, have been implemented as a part of a broader DEI initiatives, which have had negative effects on the overall learning environment. Teachers and students who behave often have to endure the students who continually misbehave with no consequence because of the restorative justice model.
Once again, Lindsey provides no evidence beyond anecdotes. This is something that will be addressed much later by Lisa Wilner, one of the representatives, but restorative justice can and does work when implemented properly.
Social emotional learning, also known as SEL, has been used as one method to attain equity. On KDE's website, under Social, Emotional, and Behavioral Learning, under the tab Resources for Promoting Equity, there are links to teacher resources, which include titles such as Multiplication is for White People, How to Be an Anti-Racist, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, and Decolonizing Our Minds and Actions, among many others.
Well, them some scary titles there, Lindsey. It's amazing to me that she's pointing to what is essentially a additional resources link for teachers and saying that this is bad, that somehow it is bad if our teachers have additional resources, additional recommendations of things to read to help them learn how to be better teachers, more effective teachers. And I think it's important to know that just because you read a book and because you take in the words there does not mean that you put all those words into practice. Lindsey should know this better than anybody. She is a self-proclaimed Christian. I'm sure she's heard the words of Jesus, and she certainly doesn't put all those into play in her day-to-day life. So, our teachers don't have to do the same. These are just resources to help you learn and educate you. But I just want to go through and I looked up a couple of these titles because we've got the Multiplication is for White People, which, that title's clearly wrong if you've seen me do math. But this is and I'm reading this blurb from Amazon, so of course it's a marketing blurb, but it would seem like something that would be right up Lindsey's alley. As MacArthur Award-winning educator Lisa Delpit, the writer of the book, reminds us, and as all research shows, there is no achievement gap at birth. This book is apparently about how to fix the persistent black-white achievement gap in America's public schools, something that Lindsey called attention to earlier in her speech. In her long-awaited second book, she presents a striking picture of the elements of contemporary public education that conspire against the prospects of poor children of color, creating a persistent gap in achievement during the school years that has eluded several decades of reform. So this is a book aimed at trying to raise scores, aimed at raising expectations, which conservatives are always telling us we don't give children of color the proper expectations of them. In fact, she mentions this when she talks about discipline. So this is a book that addresses that. So what is her problem with this book? It's that title, Multiplication is for White People. I don't know how good Lindsey's skills are in multiplying. Maybe that's part of the problem here. Anyway. Next one, How to Be an Anti-Racist. This is one that I've actually read. Read it a few years ago. Excellent book. That title probably, why would we want our teachers to be anti-racist? Clearly, we want our teachers to be racist. Why would we want them to read and absorb this information? Good teacher is a racist teacher, apparently. The Inner Work of Racial Justice, Healing Ourselves and Transforming Our Communities Through Mindfulness. This one again, looks like it's about, if this is the one she's talking about, Healing Ourselves Through Mindfulness. It talks about institutionalized racism, systemic injustices, unconscious bias. Again, this one's probably one that if she read that, she'd be like, oh, this is terrible. But why is this terrible? What is it about reading this that's going to make a teacher suddenly be horrible and an ineffective teacher? It doesn't take away from their educational perspective. It doesn't take away from how they teach anything. It gives them more tools in their toolbook. Just as, I read and other people read, watch documentaries, become informed. This is another way of informing yourselves. That's part of what we educate people for critical thinking and to absorb and be curious about knowledge. And Lindsey appears to hate that. She hates that. She's like, these people are getting advice to read books, and we cannot have educators going out there and reading more information about stuff. Because apparently we don't want our kids doing that either, I guess. I don't know. It's really a confusing message for me from Lindsey here, so I guess we'll just continue.
SEL has permeated our schools at great financial risk and loss of classroom instructional time, with critics arguing it has placed additional time-consuming burdens on our teachers and staff and pushes the same indoctrinating DEI concepts just through a different vehicle.
Okay, irony alert. Lindsey comes out against indoctrination, and Lindsey comes out against wasted classroom time. But Lindsey was also a staunch supporter of LifeWise Academy and Moral Instruction, a program offered in Oldham County schools, or that would have been offered in Oldham County schools had they approved it, that would take kids out for an hour a week. So we're talking about 30 hours of lost instructional time for those kids, to indoctrinate them, my words, not hers, and probably not their words, in a certain Christian theology. They wrap it in this wrapping of moral instruction, but it is a curriculum developed by Southern Baptists through their arm, their literature arm, and then implemented by this LifeWise Academy. They're trying to push it in school systems throughout the state. Thankfully, they are failing. But it is in its way a form of indoctrination. And I say this as a lapsed Catholic, a Christian faith, that I think many people do not want their child to be taught religion at school. They don't want their child to be proselytized to by fellow children, which is something that apparently happens with this organization and what those kids are encouraged to do. But this lost instructional time, the thing about the law and the way it was written is that these kids don't have to make up that time. And in addition to that, if they go to this program, the kids that are left behind who don't go to this program, if it's approved in a school system, the LifeWise Academy, whatever it might be, the kids left behind cannot have instruction in their core curriculum classes. So if it's during science class, well, sorry, the kids left behind can't do science. Math, can't do the math, can't do the reading. The things that are important to Lindsey, for an hour a week, there was a potential of losing that instruction. So if she's worried about scores, and she's worried about not being indoctrinated, and she's worried about wasted time, doesn't really explain why she was such an avid supporter of LifeWise Academy. There is certainly no dearth of religious education or programs after school or programs on Sundays for kids to get moral instruction in the faith of their choosing or their parents' choosing. But Lindsey was all for this to happen during the school day. And what was interesting there was that when Oldham County Schools tried to make arrangements to maybe support after school, they didn't want that. So it was clearly a political move. We want to put our faith during the school day to prove a point. So this lost instructional time, I'm sorry, Lindsey, doesn't hold water that you care about that.
The ideological framing of DEI models are also producing societal consequences. DEI reinforces division rather than unity, and encourages students, teachers, and staff to see each other through the lens of identity and creating groupthink instead of creating independent thinkers.
Well, 3 concepts here: groupthink, divisiveness, and critical thinking, none of which are on display by Lindsey Tichenor. The DEI laws were handed down from on high to be addressed by large national organizations who push these talking points to local Republicans to champion bills just like this one. There's not a lot of groupthink here. I would imagine that probably Lindsey's research amounts to reading whatever's been handed to her. It's clear that she has not really given great thought to how diversity, equity, and inclusion concepts might make it better for students to learn. She's obviously not done any of the reading that she's so scared of. She's a true group thinker and not a critical thinker. And she's participating with a party that is big into groupthink. For all the criticisms of liberals, the truth is we tend to be our own biggest critics, and there's not much agreement on much of anything, which is probably why the party is always in such a shambles, because we can't all agree on anything, nor are we all frightened by individual concepts like DEI that we can all rally behind. So it's just funny to hear that. And in terms of divisiveness, this law in and of itself is divisive because Lindsey has portrayed it as it's us against them, when in reality it's more let's all understand each other better. And those of us who have had advantages, let's understand how that's played into our history. It's not a threatening, these concepts are not threatening unless you truly aren't a critical thinker and you're scared of the world. Diversity, equity, and inclusion should not be scary thoughts. You should not be scared if someone challenges you with a concept or a book title or anything else if you're a critical thinker. The people that tend to fear this stuff the most are not critical thinkers and honestly embrace divisiveness, and they feel like everyone else is against them in the same way that they're criticizing others for. There's just a lot of irony there. And so, to talk about divisiveness in the classroom, this is a woman, Lindsey Tichenor, who is pushing this law, which is divisive. And then she's also aligned herself with people like Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk's divisive group. She's trying to push them in our schools, without a thought of the irony there. And she is meeting with the American Family Association of Kentucky, which is a group, a hate group, for lack of a better term. I know they hate me to say that. You can't say somebody's a bigot because they get offended. The bigots get offended, but it is led by Frank Simon, MD, a man who's about 270 years old, who has been fighting against rights for gay people and the LGBTQ community as a whole for, I think, since I was in college, which graduated in the early 90s. So he's been at it for a long time, and he's still running that group. He's still preaching hate, and she's going to go speak in front of his group. So please don't tell me about divisiveness, Lindsey. You enjoy it, and you champion it.
The full impact of DEI initiatives are still emerging, but posts shared on recent social media last year revealed the underlying perspectives of one of Kentucky's most influential DEI leaders in public ed. In a message directed towards students and colleagues, the Chief Equity Officer at Jefferson County Public Schools stated, "Regardless of the rooms, meetings, and classes you're in, know the majority of white people could care less about you and have no issue harming you."
This has been a big one for the Republican Party, and I had to try to address this with John Hodgson, another rep, who brought this up in a town hall. But John Marshall's comments came in an important context, and that context is the election of Donald Trump. The election of Donald Trump, the second term, was indeed, and still is, I think, I'm sure, a frightening prospect for minority groups. We can see from his policies, we can see from his actions, we can see, with his immigration stance, with his racist comments, with his racist behavior, with the very propaganda being issued by his departments, including one just recently with a very Nazi-looking Zeppelin in the background of the Statue of Liberty talking about how we're not going to allow certain people into the country, those are racist statements. Those are an indication that Donald Trump doesn't care about you, which by extension, the overwhelming popularity of Donald Trump, it may make you wonder, who do people really care about when they vote for a man as awful as Donald Trump? So, I don't think John Marshall hates all white people. I don't think John Marshall is a man who doesn't think. I don't know him specifically. I know of him. But I think his comments reflected an anger and a frustration and a sorrow at the election of Donald Trump, in the same way that I'm sure Lindsey's friends and colleagues were very upset when we elected a black president twice. They are concepts, and just because he's an educator doesn't mean he can't have an opinion, or that he doesn't talk to people who share that same opinion and fear about it, and that it doesn't make you wonder about who has your back. It's clear Lindsey Tichenor doesn't have anyone's back, anyone of color's back, by her push against diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if she's upset by that, it's more of a reflection on her than it is on John Marshall. And I'll stand behind that statement 100%. I get why they're inflamed by it, but maybe they should be.
Students have also provided insight into how DEI frameworks are shaping their views. While serving on the JCPS task force last interim, where our stated goal was to identify ways to improve student outcomes and evaluate needed areas of support, my colleagues and I listened to hours of testimony from students at Male and Central high schools who characterized the members as racist and white supremacist. These interactions reflect how DEI-based concepts are influencing students' perceptions and thought processes.
Okay, so Lindsey here, once again, we have an instance where we can't prove or disprove what Lindsey is saying because there is no video that I can find of those meetings. The ones at the Capitol are on video. The ones that were held at JCPS, for some reason, were not videotaped. I can't find them on YouTube. I can't find them on KET. So maybe they exist out there, and if they do, please let me know. But I was not able to find that. But I was able to find the minutes from those meetings. And it's interesting because she says she talked hours of testimony at Central and Male high schools from students who were berating them. And I went back and looked at the minutes because the minutes do list who spoke. And going by students and alumni as they're listed in those minutes, I counted 4 students at Male and 3 students at Central. Okay, and that's in addition to lots of other speakers and the task force meeting. The total time of those meetings, those hours of meetings where they were berated by students for hours, the total time that these 7 students would have been in those meetings at Male started at 5:33, adjourned at 6:33. So 4 students spoke, as well as a bunch of other adults, and I would assume the task force spoke as well. So that's an hour. They were berated for hours, but that's meeting's only an hour, and there were 4 students there. 4 students. Central, 3 students there. 5:30 to 6:55. So what's that? That's an hour and 25 minutes. So Lindsey appears to be fudging the truth. And again, I can't prove or disprove it, and Lindsey knows that. There's no video that we can find. I did find from News Channel 11 one very angry, to prove her point, found a very angry student who said some very inflammatory things about the task force. And so here that is.
The separation of resources, funding, and administrative support that typically comes with maintaining unified district boundaries will likely lead to disparities in educational opportunities for students.
It is my hope with this bill that every student from Pikeville to Paducah will have an equal opportunity to a high-quality education, free from efforts to shape young minds against one another. It is my hope that we will return a high level of accountability of taxpayer resources that are allocated to serve Kentucky students in education. After years of diversity, equity, inclusion, not only has education not improved across the board, but we have seen DEI negatively impact Kentucky's most economically disadvantaged kids.
Lindsey does not want to divide and pit kids against each other. What's Lindsey's evidence that this is happening? None. She's provided none. Like everything else in this, she's not providing evidence. She's either providing anecdotes, statements of fear, quoting book titles. Nothing here is an academic intellectual argument, which is quite pathetic considering this is the Education Committee, a woman who is sponsoring bills about education, who is not presenting an intellectual argument. She's not a critical thinker. She doesn't want to do research. She's lazy. She wants to scare, put fear in, and make broad statements without understanding that correlation is not the same as causation. If kids are not doing well, you have to figure out why they're not doing well. To simply say, hey, diversity, equity, inclusion programs were happening during this time and scores are not doing well, that's not a reason to get rid of something. You can figure out if there are things that aren't working, but I don't think you can throw out the baby with the bathwater here, because diversity, equity, inclusion, the very concepts of which are how do we help people who are not doing well do better, be it whatever category they're in. How do we make them feel more included? How do we make them easier to reach as educators? All of these things are important as diversity, equity, inclusion. Are there some things that maybe go off the deep end? Sure, it happens in everything. We see that in selling curriculum. There are a lot of people who make grand promises for reading programs, math programs, with a sales pitch. Happens in everything. It happens in every industry. But that does not mean that diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a broad, nebulous concept, is bad. And Lindsey's not proven that. And so when she says at the end of this, we're not helping our most disadvantaged students. What is Lindsey's plan? I will tell you what Lindsey's plan is. She has none. She doesn't care. She does not care about these disadvantaged students. What she cares about is making an argument about a program that she feels makes her feel bad because she's a white woman, and helps support her political career because it's a big deal to be against anything that is diverse, be it the LGBTQ community. If you support for them, that's bad. Minorities, that's bad. Immigrants, that's bad. All this is bad. Lindsey in Be Kind, Oldham County thinks all of that is terrible. And I think it's because she's not a very bright person. And honestly, I don't think she's a very nice person. But to say we're pitting students against one another, all of this is divisive on Lindsey Tichenor's part. And she knows it, and she doesn't give a damn.
BR 1149 is a step in the right direction to help Kentucky education in our K-12 institutions get back on track.
Lindsey's guest here is Michael Frazier. Michael Frazier is an interesting individual. He's director of the Kentucky Student Rights Coalition, a group he founded. But he identifies as a gay male, which I find interesting given his politics. He has been here working against diversity, equity, and inclusion, which, go figure, with Lindsey. But he's also been at the table with people like Jennifer Decker, who has sponsored legislation against transgender youth. He seems to not have a problem with, engaging with and getting in bed with these legislators that want to deny rights, deny the humanity of people who are in the minority. So it's interesting to see him come out in favor of this diversity, equity, and inclusion bill. But here's his testimony, and I'll give any commentary along the way I have.
Does Mr. Frazier wish to make a comment?
Just quickly.
I can give you 5 minutes.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And Senator Tichenor, thank you for picking up the mantle to ensure that we have equal opportunity protections in education. When we look at DEI, we look at two things. One, censorship, and then the other being what stifles productivity, which is discrimination. DEI is something that had good intentions when it first started out in the Commonwealth, but evolved into something much more. So with DEI in K through 12, we're seeing what are the counterparts of fulfilling our mission into what is education for K through 12, which is to produce civically engaged, and also mindful, critically thinking individuals for society. DEI is the antithesis of those things. So with that, of course, we're here to support the bill. We're here to ensure that all students from Pikeville to Paducah, as Senator Tichenor said, have the same equal opportunity to education, especially for our young people. So with that, I appreciate your time and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Senator Tichenor, for that presentation. We do have time for questions. Once again, we have, as of right now, 5 questions. If you could be brief in your question, I would appreciate it. Representative Bojanowski will be first up.
Yes, thank you. My question's for you, Senator Tichenor. My colleagues in the classroom, we believe wholeheartedly that students don't learn if their basic needs are not being met. And you go to Maslow's basic needs, food, shelter, safety, but then there's also love and belongingness. And so any inclusion efforts would be eliminated based on this initiative. Do you have access to, or can you share with the committee, peer-reviewed research that states that removing inclusion initiatives would increase student achievement, so peer-reviewed? And then secondly, if you could provide a definition from your handout of what discriminatory concepts are.
Let me address the first one. Discriminatory concepts. I'll read you the definition, which is in line with HB 4 and very similar to SB 165 from last session. Discriminatory concept means a concept that justifies or promotes differential treatment or benefits conferred to individuals on the basis of religion, race, sex, color, or national origin, unless the differential treatment or benefit is excluded from a diversity, equity, and inclusive initiative under exclusion set forth in subsection 6 of this section. On to your first question, do I have any peer-reviewed studies? I don't know that those studies exist. I would also ask, are there peer-reviewed studies that show the concepts of DEI are improving education? I don't know that those exist either. It's possible that they do, but I haven't found them.
Okay, I am not a scientist. I am not an educator. I am a simple man who is a broadcasting and film degree holder from Boston University. But I think that this concept here of peer review of diversity, equity, and inclusion misses something about how you actually do studies and how you show something does or doesn't work. And the fact that it's very difficult to prove that it does or doesn't work when you have such a concept like this. Diversity, equity, and inclusion do not mean the same things to the same people at the same time. We can't really test them because what are we testing? You have to define what you're testing. You have to define what it means. You have to set parameters. You also have to have a subject that is controllable and easily, the variables can easily be controlled out, which in public education is darn hard to do because public educators have to take every student that comes in, regardless of socioeconomic background, regardless of the supports they have in their life, regardless of their health, their hunger, their housing. These are all things that are hard to control for. Every child is different. What they respond to is different. Who's supporting them and helping them when they're not in school is different. So all of this plays into how well someone learns. And it's hard to control for that. And how do you say diversity, equity, and inclusion is helping or not helping? It's like saying, does healthcare help a person who's sick? Yeah, I mean, obviously it sounds like it works, but how do you prove that this nebulous concept made someone better? Maybe they got better on their own. Maybe the doctor's intervention helped. How do we know? And how do we know that what works for one person is going to work for another person or has a detrimental effect on another person? Like COVID, I can look at ivermectin as specific and say, does it help someone get better or not? We can test that over time and we can do experiments with that. We can control out for a lot of factors because it's a small portion of healthcare. It's something we can look at and we can test it. We can put those inputs in. We can get all the variables of people that were our subjects and we can control their healthcare. In an educational setting, how do we do that? And how do we get accurate results? It's a great difficulty for educators. It's something that when I was looking at the science of reading, which is a concept that came up a few years ago, it's very tough to prove what works and what doesn't in an educational setting. There's just too much going on. And when you're talking about a concept as broad as diversity, equity, inclusion, what does it even mean? Because Jefferson County may have one program to meet the needs of this set of students, and Oldham County, where Lindsey Tichenor is, may have less or none and still have better outcomes because their student body is not as diverse, their student body has more money. So that just all this stuff that a peer-reviewed study sounds great, but it's also darn hard to do. And I think really what we need to look at is, what is the common sense here at the lack of having really decent studies? Does it make sense that kids who feel supported, happy, are reached where they are, that they would have better outcomes and will feel better and more supported? Yes. And how do we control for all these other variables that keep them from learning? So, this is kind of it's a red herring in this debate, because I don't think we're ever going to have great data about it. So are we really talking about the right thing here?
I would say if you are doing anything within the classroom that is preferential or differential treatment based on these things listed as discriminatory concepts, I don't see how that could benefit students in education. As we just heard from the questions in the presentation regarding CSI schools, Ms. Foster acknowledged a possibility of why schools continue to be on the CSI list continually, is that teachers are focusing on the wrong things. And DEI that's being pushed in two districts in particular are forcing teachers to focus on the wrong things. And therefore, we're seeing negative results in their test scores.
If I may just very briefly follow up. A lot of what happens at a district level doesn't come down to the classroom. So I would tell you from my experience that there is very little that is forced upon me that I have to do that would be in any way an impact on from your legislation. What is concerning is that if we cannot have our children see themselves in the curriculum, if we cannot have initiatives that recruit teachers who look like our kids, it will continue to impact student achievement, and it will impact that belongingness. I understand middle school girls, Black girls, on a survey are the most to say that they don't feel like they belong in their schools. So should we not take that survey result and try to figure out how we can help Black girls to become more involved or more part of it? I mean, you stated that this brings division. I feel like your bill brings division to educators.
On her Facebook site, Lindsey Tichenor posted a very brief snippet of this entire testimony. And what's interesting is that she took Representative Camuel's questions to her and she lopped them off. And I'm going to start from where those questions begin. And then there's going to be a little text on the screen that shows you where she lopped it off and where Lindsey began her video. And I think it's interesting that she cut out all the things that are critical of her anti-diversity, equity, inclusion bill in her little snippet. But I'm retaining them here so you can see the question in full context, something Lindsey didn't want you to see. And when I started commenting on this on her video on Facebook, she eventually wound up blocking me from seeing the video and erased all the comments when she blocked me that I had posted about the fallacies and issues that were on her video. So just wanted to highlight that here. Again, this starts the questioning or the commentary from Representative Camuel, and it goes into where Lindsey picks up, where she says something like two things is where it starts. So just look at how much she cut out to make her look better. It says a lot about Lindsey, that she can't even have an honest debate and show the honest discussion on her webpage. Gotta wonder why.
Representative Camuel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have more of a statement than a question because I'm not sure that there is an answer that could possibly be given, Senator Tichenor. But I just want to say diversity is not anything that people should be afraid of. People should not be afraid to learn about other cultures or to learn about other religions or those who may be differently abled or what our history is. Senator, you had said that you talked about schools shaping young minds. That's actually the goal of education. The purpose of education is literally to shape minds, to impart knowledge, to teach critical thinking, to foster personal and social growth, preparing individuals from preschool on to lead productive lives, help them with career advancement as we go through as they matriculate through school. It creates informed citizenship. It's important for us to know our history. And it also contributes positively to society by building skills and confidence and also teaching our kids about adaptability and how to face life's challenges. And so to ignore or to try and silence anything dealing that promotes or helps or identifies something that teaches diversity, equity, inclusion, or belonging. I'm on the struggle. I'm just struggling with your perception of this because it paints such a negative picture of anybody who displays some sort of otherness. And maybe we have different views. I have a very diverse family, and I'm thankful for that. I represent a very diverse community from socioeconomic to multicultural, and I think those are all the things that we should be embracing. And given everything that we are facing right now, when I talk to my constituents, what I've tried to wrap my head around in listening to your presentation is people are worried about health care. They're worried about access to homes. They're worried about affordability of groceries with tariffs. They're still rising. They're trying to put food on the table. They want access to insurance, and we know that they'll be facing rising insurance costs. So how does this bill, I just don't see how your bill, how this proposal helps Kentuckians. So thank you.
There are a great many bills that will flow through this legislative session that won't address those issues. We touch thousands of different subject matters, and they aren't all focused on economic prosperity, although I believe education is one of the foundational principles that can build educational economic opportunities. Two things that you said that I want to point out. You said something about I don't want to shape kids' minds. I don't want kids' minds to be shaped against one another.
Senator, that's
what
the
I
purpose
used.
of education.
I said I don't want their minds to be shaped against one another. That was my quote. That was what I said. I would hope you would agree that's an important concept, that we don't shape minds to be against one another of our young students. I want to also bring up, you say this is a divisive bill. Let me tell you something that's divisive. In the Diversity, Equity, and Poverty Department at JCPS, there's an employee who wrote a document put together called the Affirming Racial Equity Tool that's to be used in the classroom. So you say these policies don't flow down to the classroom. I would be surprised at that. She is an anti-racist specialist. That's her title. So in the back of this document for teachers' use, it says a definition of diversity. For the purpose of this component, diverse will be defined as pertaining to any and all cultures that are not heterosexual, male-centered, white, Western, or Christian. I think that's divisive. I'm not done. And now, anti-racist education, just to give you a definition of what that means. Anti-racism, and again, this is information from Jefferson County, is an action-based response to racist policies, practices, systems, and beliefs that exist in education. And here's the kicker. It focuses intently on instruction, curriculum, and pedagogy as liberatory means to decenter whiteness. That's divisive. I don't know how you see that as not divisive. And I'm not sure how that would help a student learn how to read and do basic math.
It's clear that Lindsey is reading from something, but she's really not given us any details to find this document. And I've done some research, and I've tried different search engines and even the AI searches, and I can't find this document anywhere. So it's impossible to determine what the context is of any of the texts that she's read, in what situation the training was presented, what the scenarios were that were presented. So again, this is stuff that she's presented to sound inflammatory, but without context, how are we supposed to determine that? I had asked her about that in her Facebook post, but she banned me. She doesn't want to answer those questions. But if you're an educated person and a critical thinker, those are the questions you want to ask: is where exactly is this document coming from? Can I see the full document? Can I see the full context? Can I understand the concepts involved and understand where those words you read came from in context with all the other words that are on those pages? You've cherry-picked some information, Lindsey. That doesn't mean that what you cherry-picked is actually the reality of what you're saying. So I just, this is, and I keep beating a dead horse here, but this is why this frustrates me so much, is because it's clear Lindsey wants to attack diversity, equity, and inclusion without actually thinking about it, without being a critical thinker, without being educated. She just wants to attack it because she wants to get her victory, get her racist bills through, and that's sad, especially when we're talking about education. It's sad how poorly educated Lindsey comes off here.
Senator, if I may.
Very quickly.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So you've cited one document in one district.
A district that affects more than 15% of the state.
Okay, based on the recent data that I can find, 24 through 25 school year in the Kentucky Department of Education school dashboards, Lindsey's a little off. It's just under 15% of the students in Kentucky, which of course is a large percentage. But what she doesn't talk about is the racial makeup of JCPS compared to the rest of the state. So I did a little number crunching, and forgive me again, I'm a broadcasting and film major, not a math major. So looking at the percentages here, find that JCPS has student body, 33.14% of the student body is white. Conversely, 66.86% is non-white. Black students make up 35.8% of JCPS. When you compare that to the state data, it really becomes clear why there is such a focus in JCPS on how things impact non-white students, because you find that as a percentage of Kentucky's total students, yes, we're almost close to 15%. But when it comes to white students, JCPS represents only 6.93% of the white students in the state, 33.73% of non-white students, and when you boil it down to just black students, it's 48.70% of black students. Almost 50% are in JCPS. Almost 50% of the state's black students are in JCPS. So I would think that a little bit of focus on how those differences may be impacting learning would be important in the largest district in the school system because of what the numbers actually show. But I guess that's not important to Lindsey.
You are
students.
citing one document in one district and trying to I think, skew the perception.
This
So that's
is the
one document.
perception in the largest district in our state that refuses to comply with the federal guidelines to pull away from the practices of DEI. And it's already cost that district $10 million, who has a deficit right now, a budget deficit, a significant one.
Senator, I would really love to just finish my point if you don't mind. And I appreciate that you have a different perspective than me. But I think the goal right now is to make sure that we are not creating, even in this give and take, there's divisiveness, and there shouldn't be. We should be embracing it all. And so I'm happy to have a further discussion about this offline. I'm happy to say I work for a public school district. My husband does as well. And I think that I can probably offer you some differing perspectives and maybe open your mind to see how it is actually beneficial to our students. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
And I would love that. And please bring the test scores when you come. I would like to see the benefits of how it's helping kids progress in their education.
Senator Rawlings.
So universities, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Universities found that offering remedial math and English classes has become necessary for many incoming students. In our K through 12 schools, there's been a rising focus on the things that are being discussed today. Equity, and then there's engaging students as an approach, and the social emotional learning, all the things that have been mentioned. So do you see a relationship with these approaches and with college students struggling to succeed after high school?
I do. I think even just the presentation before that, we see CSI schools continually being on the list, and those are usually in the economically disadvantaged areas. Is this really helping? Are we focusing on the right things in the classroom? And clearly we have moved away from the fundamentals of education, so much so that we have a significant need of remedial courses in English and math when they enter college. I was able to serve on the Commission on Race and Access to Opportunity this interim session, a first-time member, and we had our historically Black university, Kentucky State University, come and present. And I asked a very similar question to him, and the response was that they have seen a tremendous rise in needs as students are coming in to KSU. And he also said he was made aware several students at that university had a 0% GPA, which tells you if they're not able to do the basic functions of learning and don't have that base, they're going to struggle when they get into post-secondary institutions, and that's really unfortunate.
Yep. Thank you.
Representative Wilner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator. I was actually going to be quiet and just listen today, but I was really struck by your response when our colleague Rep. Bojanowski asked about discriminatory concepts. And it is undeniable that there has been years, decades of discrimination in our schools. And just to take one really quick example that's been so well documented, so closely studied, is the disproportionate discipline meted out to different students, often based on race. And historically, it has been Black males that have been more severely called out, more severely disciplined. That's beginning to shift. But there are even studies with eye tracking technology where teachers' eyes go to disproportionately Black boys in classes when they're looking for trouble, that Black boys are more severely disciplined historically. How do we move forward without acknowledging that some of those discriminatory practices are still in schools because it's so built in to us as human beings, self and other, much as we, don't want to teach it. We don't want that to be the messages that our kids absorb. But in our society, we do absorb those messages and we carry those into our classrooms. How can we fix this without acknowledging it, for starters, and addressing it explicitly?
I'm going to let Michael Frazier answer to your first statement regarding racism and discrimination that we have faced in the past. And I hope he's going to reference a recent Supreme Court ruling. I think that he will, but he'll do it better than me. In regard to the discipline issues, we have seen a method to deal with the discipline issues through this restorative justice model. It comes straight from the concepts within diversity, equity, inclusion. It is simply not disciplining students. And I don't know if you're very familiar with that process. It's something that's actually used in the court systems. And I would argue that in the court system with adults, it possibly could have some benefits. But with children who really need guardrails and really need consequences for poor behavior, it's not effective, and it's continuing to disrupt the classrooms. So I think if we get back to raising expectations for all of our students, regardless of their color, regardless of the situations, they may have had a chaotic day. Okay, we still expect you to sit still and listen. We still expect you to not disrupt the classroom, regardless of what the student's situation is. The expectations need to remain. So I would argue that we have tried to implement something through restorative justice that is simply not helping the situation.
If I could briefly respond.
1 second. Did you want Mr. Frazier to briefly comment?
Yes, please.
If he could do that quickly.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Wilner, for that question. I think it's important to note that the definition of diversity, equity, inclusion is a specific definition, and it states that there shall not be preferential nor prejudicial treatment based upon race, sex, or an immutable characteristic. So, to your question, we're not washing away inequality and the need to recognize it. In fact, the definition within Senator Tichenor's bill is a recodification of essentially non-discrimination practices based upon race and sex. So I would argue that the bill would actually require for a punctilious recognition of inequality when those things happen in public education.
Representative Wilner.
Thank you. I'm very familiar with restorative practices, and I want to say it is not a model about lack of accountability. When implemented correctly, it is all about accountability. It's having to take steps to make amends, to make restitution. It's not just you're off, everybody come in, apologize, shake hands, and move on. And I think it often gets misrepresented, misunderstood as that. And it is really a very effective model. There are school districts around the country that are using it with tremendously successful results. And so I have seen it implemented poorly, and it's exactly as you describe. But I hope you might look more deeply into what that model could offer and what it has offered in many districts across the country. Thank you.
We are getting close on time. I'm cutting questions off. As of right now, we have 4 people on the list. So if you could be brief when called upon. Representative Massaroni.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So my question is, recently in some of the hiring in 2 of our school districts, they have the gender-specific hiring. Does that get addressed in your bill? I would assume it's against federal law to hire gender-specific teachers or...
I don't know that we're looking for not preferential hiring based off of those definitions that are in the bill. So as far as are they intently saying this is a position only for a female? For what reason? It would have to be tailored to that. But I don't know that that is going to be able to be compliant with civil rights laws on the books.
Representative Stalker.
Thank you, Chair. My question is a little twofold here. The first part is I'm just curious about what teachers have you spoken to that have expressed this level of concern that it is affecting their ability to teach that core content that we know that kids are struggling with, and that this is the culprit to that?
I've talked to several teachers. They'll never say who they are because their job would be at risk. They speak about the discipline issues that they have in their classrooms that could be attributed to the concepts within DEI. Ultimately, when you look at some of the curriculum and some of the approved curriculum from Ed Reports even, there is an intentional effort to choose curriculums that have these concepts woven within them, which are divisive concepts. They simply are. When you're teaching a student about why they have an issue with being white in a concept, or a lesson I heard about in a 4th grade classroom learning about Rosa Parks and the kids on the bus. Did they feel bad about being white? Those are ideas and concepts. We shouldn't make anyone feel bad about how they were born. Those are immutable characteristics. And I don't know that we should utilize curriculum in a way to shape children in a direction that could cause division among their peers.
If I could respond, please.
Quickly.
Thank you. I think we're missing an incredible opportunity right now. I'm going to be honest. I don't feel good about being white every day for a lot of reasons, because it's a point of privilege that I get to move through the world in a way that so many of my other colleagues and friends and family members of the community don't get the privilege to do. And I'm just a female, but just a woman, just a white woman. If I was a white man, I would be functioning from a point of an even greater privilege. I think we're missing an opportunity when kids have a moment to reflect about how the color of their skin does and does not allow them to move through the world. running to them and trying to stifle that and trying to say you shouldn't feel bad, so we don't want to ever expose you to something that is going to make you have to pause and have maybe some internal feelings. It's a missed opportunity for some really good dialogue. It's not about making people feel bad about being white. I think it's about acknowledging the historical privilege that white people have always had in this country, which I don't know that anybody in this room in good conscience could argue exist and still exist. Within JCPS, we have a really diverse body of students. We have 145 languages that are spoken, and we have a really high percentage of kids that are on free and reduced lunch, 63%. In the term DEI, inclusive, diversity, equity, inclusion, it's about including everyone. White people have never been excluded. What the efforts of DEI is trying to do within a school setting now is to pull in other students. Their stories are relative. Their culture, their history, those things are important to see reflective in the reading material. And if we don't allow those things to come into our textbooks and to come into our conversations in the classroom and in a constructive way, then we are simply just trying to whitewash things. And I find that to be incredibly problematic. Thank you.
Representative Callaway, Josh Callaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You brought up a little bit about the social emotional learning. Do you have any quantifying numbers of the cost of that? Mm. And you brought up about how some of that was rooted in DEI. Just didn't know if you had more information to share on that. I know it's very commonly used across all school districts, it seems like.
I don't have any numbers on that. It's something I definitely could do more research into. I know there was a tremendous amount of money during the COVID years in the ESSER funds in order to address the mental health issues within our schools, and I think that was the gateway for SEL to come in. What's happened, from what I know about social emotional learning, it has been now used as a continuing effort to push these ideas within DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. The results of those, I know from students, from parents, from teachers, it is an extremely time-consuming, and it takes away from educational opportunities. It's very hard for a parent to opt out of those programs as well because they interweave them throughout different parts of the school day. But they also are pushing this idea that we can address issues of discrimination and racial differences through social emotional learning curriculums.
I've noticed something as I go along. I'm seeing more things and thinking about more things over the course of the days that I've been looking at this video. And here, once again, Lindsey, I don't have any data on this, but I've heard things, and that's not evidence. Lindsey talks about hearing from parents and teachers and students and how all this is bad and how all this is cutting into instructional time. She has every opportunity as a sponsor of this bill to bring those people to the table here. And who does she have? She has Michael Frazier, who from my experience is a witness for hire. He currently works for Americans for Prosperity, which is an AstroTurf group that pushes conservative talking points and free enterprise talking points across all 50 states. He's a local rep for that to make it look like it's grassroots. To my knowledge, he has no kids in the school system. It's been a long time since he was a student at the high school or K through 12 level. But he's our witness. Where are the students impacted by diversity, equity, and inclusion? Where are the black students that she says are not being helped? Where are the families of those students? Where are all the minority groups that could be speaking for or against this to talk about how it has impacted them or not impacted them and how they've suffered for it or not suffered for it? None of those people are at the table. And Lindsey says in her commentary previously that, those teachers, they're afraid to speak out. And, I have no doubt that some teachers are afraid to say anything. But I do know that I've been to JCPS board meetings where, honestly, these are all hot button concepts that do, restorative justice is something that, and discipline as a whole are issues within JCPS that teachers are concerned about. And they've expressed those concerns quite vocally at some school board meetings I've been to, including a meeting where, honestly, it was kind of a shock to the senses because teachers were not holding back on discussing the behavior of students in any form or fashion, including the very vile words that have been said to them by students. Profanity that would get you an R rating in a movie and make most people blush was used at those meetings to simply say, here's an example of what I've been through as a teacher. And it was powerful. And I think, this notion that teachers are afraid to speak out, especially in the areas where diversity, equity, and inclusion, the regions where that is most important, I think is nonsense. So where are all these people? Why are they not at the table? If this is such an impact, an adverse impact on our students, our teachers, our parents, our families, our communities, where are those people? Why is the only guy standing up, some guy without children who is a witness for hire and had nothing to add to the discussion? So that's something we really need to ask Lindsey. Where is everybody who's supposedly harmed by this? Not everybody's afraid to speak out. The next person to question Lindsey Tichenor is Jennifer Decker. And Jennifer Decker manages to be probably worse than Lindsey when it comes to her championing of racist causes and her complete lack of self-awareness. Jennifer Decker is from Shelby County. She championed the legislation last year to attack DEI in our colleges. She is very outspoken on anything that comes across her plate, dealing with racial issues. She's always come out against things. The Crown Act that's come up several times, sponsored in its last iteration, I believe, by a Republican representative, that would help protect against discrimination against certain hairstyles favored by different minority groups. She was against that. It was a simple bill brought by JCPS students, championed by JCPS students, in an act of civic activity that you would think educators would really champion and applaud. She didn't want it. It's never passed. She's just not a very bright woman. Anyone who says that their father was a white slave to an audience of the NAACP is not really someone you're looking for caring or compassion about issues involving diversity, equity, or inclusion. But here's her question.
Representative Decker.
Thank you. And thank you, Senator, for your bill and for your work in this area. We've already heard today the start of what will be countless hours of advocacy against this bill that will bear no relationship to the bill.
Representative, could you pull that mic a little bit closer, please?
You. There will be discussions of violations of inclusion, for example, that as if the bill stops all inclusionary methodology. You will hear things that are specifically excluded being spoken of as a problem with the bill. The bill does one thing, as I understand it, and that is stop unconstitutional practices that cannot be defended in the United States of America, that are based on exclusionary preferences, that will stop such things as methodologies that we've heard about that have been harmful to one minority community. It will stop them. So that should be heralded instead of criticized. Will you please go over some of the exceptions, because not that it will matter. You will still hear the arguments that those exceptions are not there and that we're stopping things that we are not stopping with this bill if it passes the legislature. Will you go over the exclusions in the bill?
Absolutely. If you look in the middle section of the summary that's provided, this is the Kentucky Education Equality Protection Act, by the way, that it's going to be called. It does not affect instruction on the historical oppression of a particular group of people. Obviously, that's our history, and we need to learn from our history. Academic research or creative works of students, religious freedom of students and school employees, It does not affect the conduct, speech, and freedom of association of students. It does not affect mental and physical health services or the ability of a school district to establish or maintain a single-sex school. It does not affect bona fide occupational qualifications and accommodations based on sex or the ability of a school district or public school to comply with a federal mandate, provided compliance is narrowly tailored to the express and enforceable provision. So those are the exceptions. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're out of time. I'm going to wrap us up with a couple brief questions. Privilege of the chair. The first question I'm going to preface and say, I in no way intend to pick on Jefferson County with this question. It's simply the case that Jefferson County is our largest school district in the state. And so you have different levels of this depending on how large your school system is. So Jefferson County is a large system, and as Jefferson County goes, so goes the state of Kentucky in testing and scores, and they comprise about 20% of our students. Do you happen to know how much JCPS is currently spending on DEI programs and initiatives?
This is a great question. It's a very hard question to answer, to be quite honest. There are budgets for the Diversity, Equity, Poverty department and division by itself, and then there's racial equity funding that includes multiple factors in funding. If I were to lump it all together, according to the most recent budget, 2024 and 25 budget, there's three, I'll say it like this, there are three primary goals that are their stated primary goals. Pillar 1 is a journey to success, Pillar 2, culture and climate, and Pillar 3, racial equity. Broken down by their numbers under Pillar 3, racial equity, is about $86 million. And again, I will say some of that is factoring in different areas of specific need for students and in their weighted funding, but it's all put together under the racial equity funding model.
So your point is some of that $86 million is for good things,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
That kids need. So it's not all DEI and things that you're talking about. But having said that, whether it's 20 million or 80 million, it's a lot of money, correct?
It's very significant.
And then you did mention that the federal government just won a judgment. I don't know if you want to call it judgment, but the district had to pay $10 million.
Well, they lost $10 million in funding.
in payments from the federal government.
Okay, this is infuriating, and this is why I'm making a 17-hour video here. This notion that JCPS somehow did something wrong that caused them to lose $10 million is nonsense. What this is retaliation from the Donald Trump administration, the administration that Lindsey Tichenor absolutely loves and had plastered all over her pages. They're the ones who did this. It wasn't the courts. It wasn't somebody saying, hey, you're discriminating. It was the Donald Trump administration. And there's a certain irony here. And I'm reading this from Courier Journal article, October 2nd, 2025, entitled JCPS Loses Magnet School Grant as Trump Administration Attacks Racial Equity Policies. What these were grants for Western High School and Coleridge Taylor Elementary magnet schools. It would have provided them $9.7 million over 5 years to support those magnets. And this is the irony. The district previously applied for the grant in 2020, but was denied in part to its lack of effort in reducing segregation in magnet programs. In other words, trying to deal with racial disparities. They were saying JCPS was discriminating. Okay, so that's the irony there. At the time, a Courier Journal analysis found that JCPS's most sought-after magnets did not serve student populations reflective of the county, with Black, Hispanic, special education, and low-income students generally underrepresented. So they were denied the grant because they were not making enough effort to deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion in these schools. Okay, that's why they were denied the grant to begin with. The U.S. Department of Education awarded JCPS the grant in 2024, so just last year, after the district made several policy changes. Now, those changes and others that were required by the previous federal administration could be reversed. So, what we're finding here is that efforts to provide more resources, better education opportunities, choice, school choice, magnet school choices, something that this group has championed for a long time. We need more school choice. An effort to make sure that those are available to these students. We're going to take that money away. This was not, again, a decision that was about discrimination. It was about the petty, racist behavior of Donald Trump and his supporters, hating anything dealing with people of color and trying to give them a leg up. That's all this was. Donald Trump pulled this money. Their buddy pulled this money. Their party is responsible for this money being taken away from JCPS. This was not a legal decision. This was his World Wrestling Federation wife-headed Department of Education coming in and taking this money away. Donald Trump did this. Donald Trump took the money away. That is the fact here. Stephen West, if he's an education chair, should do some research. Find out this information, Stephen. Find out this information, Lindsey Tichenor, and make it available. You don't because you know it's against you. Instead, you spout this crap that you haven't even bothered to look into to make it look like somehow JCPS did something wrong here. No, they did something right and then got punished by this petty little tyrant who is our president right now. He's the man that should be blamed for losing this money. But they're not going to do that. They're afraid of him. You want to talk about being afraid? Everybody in the party, with a few exceptions, is afraid of this idiot in charge of the White House who is destroying education.
The Students for Fair Admission case. Are you familiar with that
Yes,
case? Okay.
absolutely.
So in that case, the Supreme Court ruled that race-based affirmative action programs violate the Equal Protection Clause to the Constitution. And with many of our school attorneys in the state are scared to death of their own shadow when it comes to liability, right?
Sure.
They want to protect the school systems and not protect the school systems from liability of any sort, right? In your opinion, do you see the possibility, and this might be a question for Mr. Frazier also, do you see some reasoning in future courts that might lead them to rule that these certain preferences rooted within DEI might be a violation of the Equal Protection Clause and could possibly cause cash payouts if certain people sue under those circumstances? Is that a possibility?
I would say that's a possibility, and I would even say that the ruling on Students for Fair Admissions v. Harvard is more broadly applies, not just to post-secondary institutions, but it definitely could apply to K-12 institutions when you're looking at the Equal Protection Clause. But I'll turn it over to Michael Frazier.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. The short answer is we're already seeing it be applied, not just from an education admission standpoint, but also from hiring practices. Then Attorney General Daniel Cameron, in an opinion in 2023, applied Students for Fair Admission and the Equal Protection Clause within the Civil Rights Act when it related to a minority-based program within the governor's office. We're also seeing courts become very active in applying a subjective nature when it comes to ensuring that there is no discrimination based upon race, sex, and immutable characteristics. So we're already seeing that. In the Sixth Circuit, we're seeing the court be even more active when it comes to applying this because we passed the Civil Rights Act. The court has been more active in applying the Civil Rights Act when it comes to doing race, sex neutral policy, especially within education.
Thank you so much. That'll have to be the final word here.
This is an interesting question, and I'm not sure that Stephen West, who is an actual attorney, can't provide as good an answer as Lindsey Tichenor, a high school graduate, or Michael Frazier, whose background I'm not really clear on, other than I think he did graduate from college. But this Harvard decision, as I understand it, was about admissions into universities, which K through 12, every student is admitted every student has to have a place in a K through 12 public school. So I don't know, at least are we comparing apples to apples here? I don't know. I do think it is concerning when you look at the Donald Trump administration, you look at the Supreme Court that he stacked, you look at the legal environment we're in now, the truly awful work to hurt people of color, minorities, LGBTQ students. I think there is a true fear among our schools that we're going to see a lot of lawsuits. None of which will probably help students, at least if they're involved trying to dismantle these programs. So I think it's a good question. I don't think it's one that Lindsey or Michael Frazier can answer any better than the attorney, Stephen West, can here. But I do think it will probably, these rulings and the continued work against diversity, equity, and inclusion will have a chilling impact on our school system, not just in lawsuits, but also in them fearing really doing anything to help these students that might be considered discriminatory, which who decides that? Ultimately, it goes up to the Supreme Court, and this Supreme Court, if it's pushed that far, has decided in ways that really don't seem to be following legal precedent, don't seem to be following common sense. They seem more ideologically based than anything, and have said that our president basically has free reign to do pretty much anything he wants. So it's a good question. I don't suspect that any of this crew is really worried about negative impacts to the people that we're most concerned with in diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in helping. But I do think we'll see a lot more lawsuits if this environment continues the way it does, and we continue with the policies of Donald Trump, and this Supreme Court continues the way it does. So it's a good question to end on.